let's move on to some Russia, Ukraine.
Russia.
Fight for Ukraine. New world order.
Big boom. Kiev Post headline. Report identifies 33 Russian officers aiming missiles at Ukraine. War crimes possible. Okay, Kiev Post. Dropping the 33 Russian officers aiming missiles at Ukraine, huh? A very, very specific accusation here. Let's see what it says. A meticulously researched report by the independent web news group Groups Insider and Bellingcat and the German major media magazine Der Spiegel identified by name 33 Russian Federation, that's RF, military service members responsible for planning potentially thousands of missile strikes on Ukrainian homes and businesses and possibly committing war crimes in the process. Yeah, if they're planning to hit civilians and stuff with thousands of missile strikes, I mean, I suppose you might be guilty or at least suspect of war crimes. Investigators used personal telephone records of members belonging to the obscure RF Army unit called the Main Computing Center. Okay, that's what they're called, Main Computing Center. To conclude, the group's primary mission is planning and reprogramming software for precision-guided missiles aimed at Ukraine. Among other tasks, the men and women of the MCC decide which munitions to use and determine weapon flight routes, according to the investigative article made public on October 23rd. Bellingcat senior researcher Christo Grozev said via Twitter that the multinational investigative team worked 4 months going through masses of telephone records and Russian Army Military School graduate archives to build a picture of the MCC's structure and member responsibilities. Practically all are highly educated military engineers and active duty officers with backgrounds in information technology, software construction, and in a few cases, computer game development, the report said. European rights protection groups said the report constituted hard evidence that should lead to war crimes, prosecutions against specific individuals. So see, I mean, sure, obviously there's always people doing nefarious things in different groups and government ties and government sponsored and government people involved in various nations across the world here. So it's not really too much of a surprise, but I do think it's just suspicious. If they're doing a sort of a research thing and they're trying to paint the picture of what the MCC, the Main Computing Center, are up to with these 33 Russians, finding 33 of them is very specific. Why not round it to like more than 30 or, almost 35, something like that. I don't know. It's just anytime they're so specific on numbers, it just makes me suspicious. Ukrainian reaction to the publication of the MCC's members' identities called for prosecution and even vengeance. The normally even-handed neutral UNIAN news agency wrote, quote, "The article makes public the names and faces of the criminals who, at a distance, sitting in comfortable chairs, launch Russian cruise missiles to kill civilian Ukrainians in their homes. These scum are employees of a secret unit. They are remote killers, one of the key and still anonymous actors allowing Putin to wage an aggressive war." So, yes, bad guys have a secret group trying to kill us all with their missiles, which could be said about the United States, their involvement in things around the world. We can't say that we're not guilty of such agendas and even operations. Maybe I'm just being a crazy tinfoil hat man when I say that, but I think it's pretty well documented that the United States has played a role in this type of activity for a long time. So, yeah, for us to call it out, or these independent research groups, which I understand, Der Spiegel, where it's often brought up, and Bellingcat in the sort of truth-seeking type of framing, but I don't know. I tend to believe that while there is truth to all this, it's also true from, all sides in a sense. And speaking of 33, just a quick side note, Variety.com here, Amazon's Fallout series from Westworld creators gives a first look at its Vault 33. So you have Amazon, look for that show, Vault 33, not very hidden anymore, just interface. But it's all about the Satanists.
He's a Satanist from one of the Satanist churches here where they sacrifice babies.
This is the times.co.uk. We're still under the Russian topic here, specifically zooming in on Putin. The headline, Desperate Putin portrays Ukraine in the West as satanic. Satanic.
He's a Satanist.
Losing my connection here. From imperialists to evil capitalists, Kremlin propaganda has had many names over the decades for Western countries. Now, with the Russian army on the run in Ukraine, President Putin has a new slur. Satanists.
He's a Satanist.
Man, my jingle board is not connected properly or something. Sorry. Although Putin was once a KGB officer in the official atheist Soviet Union, he is increasingly seeking to portray himself as a staunch defender of Christian values against what he depicts as a demonic and degenerate West. During a recent speech at the Grand Kremlin Palace in Moscow, Putin lashed out against the outright Satanism that he alleged was being promoted by American and European leaders, his face distorted with rage. The Russian leader described the war in Ukraine as an existential struggle for humanity's collective soul. Yes. It's got a bunch of pictures here. Putin claimed that the fruits of Satanism in the Western countries were the promotion of LGBT issues in schools. Quote, do we really want perversions that lead to degradation and extinction to be imposed on children in our schools from the primary grades? He asked. Quote, do we really want to have here in Russia parent number 1, parent number 2, parent number 3? Okay. The popular Kremlin propaganda trope is that people in many Western countries are forbidden by law from referring to mothers and fathers and must use numerical terms instead. Okay. Okay. All right. It's always interesting when a news outlet has to build the I don't know, the guilty aspect. You know, they have to build the straw man to tear it down in a sense. They always do this. You know, they're like, well, he said this, and normal people will be like, okay, all right, what? I don't understand. Okay, parent number 1, what is he talking about? Oh, in the Kremlin, the propaganda is, you know, in the West, we can't call parents mothers and fathers, so we have to refer to them by number. Oh, it's a conspiracy. It's a fake news that circulates Russia. But I'm sure it has to do with, a few years ago, I think a lot of people remember that there was a time when progressive politics was entering social awareness, and there was a lot of people that basically started to say that referring to parents as mother and father is sexist, and it's not gender, whatever. It was the progressive argument about that fact. That's what it's referring to, I'm sure. But, of course, when the UK reports it, the times.co.uk reports it, it's some kind of bad, evil thing. The shift in rhetoric has been enthusiastically adopted by pro-Kremlin figures. Quote, the battle with the West is acquiring not only a military, economic, and political character, but also a religious and metaphysical one, said Alexander Prokhanov, a nationalist writer. Maria Zakharova, the foreign ministry spokeswoman, lashed out recently at Britain and other countries that had imposed sanctions on Patriarch Kirill, the head of the Russian Orthodox Church, a key Kremlin ally. Quote, only Satanists can impose sanctions against the Patriarch, she said. And continuing here, at the height of the Cold War, it was common for American politicians to describe the Soviet Union as a godless nation. In 1983, Ronald Reagan labeled the communist state an evil empire whose abandonment of religion meant it was doomed. 4 decades on, history has come full circle, but does Putin really believe that Western countries are ruled by a cabal of cackling Satanists? Analysts say this is unlikely. Okay, so they're saying, or at least they're reporting, that analysts, which is a funny word to have there, analysts, or saying that Putin doesn't actually believe that the West is satanic. It's just part of his propaganda speech and to try to rile up the conservative crowd in Russia and the whole deal, which may or may not be true. It doesn't even matter, because the blueprint for a radicalization using religion type of system was found in the United States. I mean, it's happened throughout history, but more recent history, close to home in America, we've covered it. It's sort of the roots of Christian nationalism, where the psychological strategy board created by Truman in the 40s or late 30s and 40s basically created a program to influence a generation through church leaders and pastors and everything else across the country to weaponize them, to have a Bible in one hand and a gun in the other. There was a giant American psyop. So given the context of how well that worked during the Cold War and all that, and the atheist enemy of Russia and the Soviet Union, now it's sort of just, again, musical chairs. They're just different, same tactics, different players. Now Russia is using that whole religious war language, and they've done it very well. They've really appealed to a certain type of thinking and drawn sympathy from a lot of conservative people in the West here. Maybe not, and it becomes difficult because a lot of people aren't necessarily like supporting Putin. They're just saying like, yeah, we tend to kind of agree with his sort of outlook on the state of the world and the West being kind of satanic in a sense. I mean, if you want to root it biblically, everywhere is kind of satanic. The prince of the power of the air, the rulers, the authorities, they're not necessarily the good guys. They're the ones that rebelled. They're actually shown judgment. You go to Psalm 82. They were referred to as sons of God. These sort of principalities and powers over nations, and so they're no good. They're the bad guys. They're the bad influence, and so nobody's really free from that. So it's not so much looking at it from the strictly fleshly geopolitical perspective, but it is interesting to see that the West now taking on a more atheistic, or at least they'll say scientific approach to policy or just world affairs, and blaming Putin as leveraging religion to carry out his agenda, which is nothing new in the United States. And it's sort of almost a battle over who gets to carry that narrative out, when in reality, the real church is out there. It's doing their thing, living day to day, trying to spread the gospel, love God, love your neighbor, and, living it out, walking the walk. So there you go.